when we look at what occurred, the attack of the armory, the subsequent kidnapping of various persons, and subsequent abduction and arrest of Brown, all in a matter of some 48 hours. We see in this moment an effort to not only reconcile the nation to itself, but also in many ways an effort to finally fulfill the Declaration. I think it's ironic, it's symbolic, that one of the persons kidnapped by Brown and his company and held hostage was none other than a grandnephew of George Washington, Lewis Washington. George Washington, of course, being one of the founding fathers of the nation, who, if not present at the writing of the Declaration of Independence, certainly fought on behalf of it. Yet he himself, being a liberator with the contradiction of holding slaves. The irony and symbology of that moment where the grandnephew of the liberator of the nation who held slaves is witnessing a man trying to bring the promise of that declaration to its full fruition, using the same means Washington used to liberate the nation. Fred Douglass, in honoring Brown, compared him to the Patrick Henry who cried liberty or death. Brown says he evinced a conception of the sacredness and value of liberty which transcended in sublimity that of her own Patrick Henry, and made even his fire-flashing sentiment of liberty or death seem dark and tame and selfish. Henry loved liberty for himself, but this man loved liberty for all men, and for those most despised and scorned, as well as for those most esteemed and honored. Within the activist community of African Americans, all the way from Douglass to Du Bois, even to persons such as Malcolm X, John Brown has been held up as a litmus to white America to decipher white folks' true intent on questions relative to race in our society. When we look at the state of our nation today, there's clearly a lot that we have to be proud of. Clearly, this year, the 150th anniversary of Harpers Ferry raid coincides with the election of our nation's first African-American president. I think that's honorable. I think that's something that is worthy of praise because, quite frankly, people, we're talking about a circumstance here that in Brown's day would never have been dreamed of, quite honestly. Some of us prior to the election never dreamt of it either. But certainly not at a time when African people were considered real estate, chattel. When the Supreme Court of this very nation stated that African people would never be citizens. To witness that very nation elect to the highest political office someone of African ancestry is a remarkable testament to the will of the American people. That has to be acknowledged and honored. America does a disservice to itself by dismissing the magnitude of this moment. What is sad to me is that I fear that our nation will in fact miss it. as I watch the news, as I look at the nation, as I see what has happened, where people below the veneer of these political debates that are occurring lies the reality of race and the fear that race accompanies in our society. It's not enough for people to criticize our president. Some way, shape, form, and fashion, there has to be some element about his race involved in it. So much so that now you have people who, white persons in particular, who voted for Obama now embarrassed to admit such in public. I'm not here to praise Barack Obama. What I am here to do is to help us reconsider our approach. Because just about every presidential election since the Civil War, our nation has voted along the Mason-Dixon line. For many, the Civil War still rages. The problem is that when you look at history, those who would make a case for wrongdoing on the part of the Union or how the Civil War finally would end fail to appreciate how Southern states were reinstated into the Union, giving them the right to essentially re-enslave African people for almost another century. It is only in truth, folks, that our nation has been a true democracy only in the past few generations. Had America been a democracy in truth, meaning everybody got the right to vote, nobody had the fear coming to the polls, this historic moment would not be so historic. And to find that there are some who are still displeasured by the movement our nation has taken is frankly disheartening. It says a lot about where we still need to go. Again, it's one thing to criticize the leader of your nation. Another thing to compare his wife to a gorilla. And to advocate or defend such. Just as in John Brown's day, Brown made clear to the nation, the world looks at us in disgust for calling ourselves free while we hold a nation of people enslaved. The question becomes, how do we move forward? The question becomes, how do we understand ourselves as Americans? John Brown helps us in this regard if we're willing to look at him, if we're willing to face up to the challenge of who he was as a man, as an American, as a white man. Race, in truth, has nothing to do with biology. There's only one race. It's the human race. This concept of race was created in history at a particular time by a particular group of people for a particular purpose. That purpose still remains with us. John Brown encourages us toward that goal, toward that effort. Thank you.